A homeless puppy followed a woman, and then this happened. A piercing wind cut through the late autumn air, sweeping fallen leaves across the dimly lit sidewalk and carrying the faint sound of distant sirens. At precisely that moment, somewhere between the flickering street lamp at the corner and the line of silent brownstones, a small puppy emerged from behind an overflowing trash bin. His fur was matted with dirt, his eyes wide and round with fear and longing. He was shivering under the city's unrelenting chill. That one fragile image, illuminated by the pale glow of a single overhead lamp, hinted at both despair and hope. What no one knew yet, what no one could have predicted, was how this brief encounter between a lonely puppy and an even lonelier woman would unleash a torrent of emotion, unearth buried secrets, and set in motion a series of events as staggering as they were transformative. The night seemed like any other until she passed by, consumed by her own worries, head down, shoulders hunched, scarf pulled tight around her neck. Her name was, from the outside, looked like countless others navigating the city's nightly chill. Yet, inside her chest thundered a vortex of private anguish she had perfected hiding. She never expected to have her life turned upside down by a trembling stray puppy. But fate has a habit of landing in the of places, at the of times, to the of people. As the puppy took a few hesitant steps, his tiny paws scraping softly on the concrete, almost missed him. Her mind was weighed down by the memory of an argument she'd had earlier that day, and an unresolved sorrow she'd carried for years. She was so lost in her own thoughts that she nearly walked right past him, but something, some subtle sense of being watched, made her glance over her shoulder. And there he was, standing beneath that, staring at her with eyes that cut like lasers straight to her heart. It took only an instant for her to understand that this was no ordinary meeting. The puppy's fragile stare ignited a spark of empathy she didn't realize still lived within her. She'd spent so long running from her pain that she had almost forgotten what it felt like to genuinely care, to feel that warm flood of compassion crash through her defenses. Yet in that single moment, in that quiet stillness, the puppy's unwavering gaze dismantled all her barriers. Though it was late, and the neighborhood was silent save for the whisper of distant traffic, knelt down. She extended a trembling hand, exposing the vulnerability she'd spent years hiding. The puppy took a few careful sniffs. Then, timidly, he pressed his wet nose against her palm. A wave of pure warmth shot through his body. Time stilled. The cold wind no longer mattered. It was as though the entire universe paused to acknowledge that something monumental was happening between a broken woman and a forsaken puppy. Had always sworn she would never take on another responsibility, certainly not something as demanding as a pet. She had her reasons, complicated, painful reasons that traced back through every significant heartache she'd endured. Yet an undeniable gravity pulled her closer to this tiny creature. Her eyes stung with tears she refused to let fall. She spoke softly, in a voice that cracked from disuse and the weight of unshed grief. "You're all alone, aren't you?" "So am I." In response, the puppy let out a tiny whine that sounded almost like an answer. Couldn't help but smile, even as her vision blurred with unspoken sorrow. Part of her wanted to leave. She could barely manage her own life. What business did she have adopting a stray? But as she stood to resume her walk, the puppy took a few quick steps to follow her. He was determined, despite having no promise of warmth or shelter or food. In that moment, he simply latched onto her presence, and somehow she knew he had chosen her. Walked a few steps more, torn between logic and an emotion that pounded at her heart. Each time she looked back, the puppy paused and looked up at her, as if to say, "Don't leave me. I'm trying so hard to keep up." The inevitability of the situation sank deeper with every pulse in her veins. Finally, she let out a resigned sigh. "Okay," she whispered, softly enough that the only one who might have heard was the small creature trailing her. "You can follow me, but I can't promise anything." Saying the words made her uneasy. Promises were a delicate thing in her life, shattered far too often. Yet there she was, making an unspoken contract with this puppy who demanded nothing other than the chance to stay by her side. And so, step after step, they walked together through the silent city streets. A swirl of leaves accompanied them, danced by the wind. Cars passed intermittently, their headlights sweeping over the unlikely pair, a forlorn woman and a resolute homeless puppy who refused to be left behind. By the time they reached a small, dimly lit apartment building, the chill in the air had intensified, turning each breath into a cloudy exhalation. She paused on the worn front steps of the old building. Even from the stoop, one could smell the faint odor of the hallway's peeling paint and the mustiness from the ancient carpet lining the stairwell inside. She turned around slowly, looked down at the puppy, and felt that gentle pressure in her chest again, as if some part of her was afraid of taking him upstairs. She asked herself, "What am I doing?" But the puppy wagged his tail, a small, hopeful flutter. "All right," she murmured, opening the door and letting the puppy scurry in ahead. A moment later, she took a hesitant step inside, the door clicking shut behind them. An unsettling hush lingered in the corridor, broken only by the puppy's tiny, excited sniffs along the baseboards. Dim light from a single overhead bulb flickered. The hallway always made feel uneasy. It carried a sense of isolation, a place suspended between the outside world and her solitary apartment. But tonight, it felt different. There was a new presence with her, fragile, small, and somehow managing to fill the space with a quiet sense of hope. Led the puppy up the narrow flight of stairs to her unit on the second floor. Her apartment was modest. A small kitchen that opened into a snug living room, a single bedroom with an adjacent bathroom. She hadn't decorated much, just a few mismatched pieces of furniture and some photos of places she once dreamed of visiting, now collecting dust on the shelf. Yet under the soft glow of a solitary floor lamp, everything took on a gentler hue. The puppy glanced around, nose twitching, analyzing every corner. Had never been the type to fawn over baby talk or get overly emotional, but something compelled her to crouch beside him. "I don't even have any food for you," she admitted, running a hand anxiously through her hair. No, I couldn't. I never planned to have a dog, but you found me. Let me see what I can do." She rummaged through her fridge, finally producing a slice of deli turkey. Carefully, she tore it into small pieces and offered them in her palm. The puppy devoured them in seconds, tail whipping so fast that it made a soft thumping sound against the floor. Couldn't help but grin, a warmth spreading through her chest. "Hungry, huh?" she said gently. It was like something inside her was unlocked. She'd been so careful, so guarded, but this helpless creature's presence was already changing her interior landscape. That night she allowed the puppy to sleep in an old blanket nest she cobbled together. Occasionally, she jolted awake, half expecting the puppy to have disappeared. But each time, she found him curled up snugly, chest rising and falling with each soft breath. If she strained her ears, she could hear him dream, tiny whimpers escaping his muzzle, as if he was chasing something delightful in his sleep. However, as the quiet hours unfolded, found herself wrestling with a relentless storm of emotions. She remembered the day she lost everything she thought she wanted, a memory she had tried so hard to suppress. She remembered another life, another home, another chance at happiness that had slipped through her fingers in a way she couldn't control. She remembered how she had once dared to open her heart, only to watch it crumble in ways that left her spirit shattered. And now, having a living creature depend on her felt risky. Love in any form was dangerous ground. By the time sunrise tinted the sky with subtle shades of pink and gold, had barely slept. She was sprawled on the couch, arms folded, eyes puffy from exhaustion. The puppy stirred and padded over on unsteady legs, sniffing at her. She reached down to stroke his fur, tangling her fingers gently in the dirty, tangled strands. "I suppose you want breakfast," she murmured. There was no question of returning the puppy to the cold streets. The idea was unthinkable. Instead, she'd have to figure out a plan. But maybe, just maybe, that was exactly what she needed, something to stir her from her anguish, to break her stagnation. The notion both thrilled and terrified her. That morning set the stage for what became an extraordinary bond. The first hurdle was obvious. He needed a vet visit. She couldn't let him remain in that neglected condition. So she found a local clinic that accepts walk-ins. Gathering him in her arms, she carried him past the old building's squeaking front door, bracing herself against the brisk air. A few curious onlookers glanced over, but no one asked questions as she hurried to the nearest bus stop, the puppy tucked beneath her coat like a fragile secret. The bus ride felt surreal. The moan of the engine, the hiss of the doors, the gentle lurch each time it stopped. At one point, a little girl across the aisle caught sight of the puppy's head peeking out from his jacket. The child's face lit up, and she let out a tiny squeal. Reflexively tightened her hold, trying to keep the puppy hidden, but the girl's excitement was too genuine to ignore. The child's mother looked over, offered a tired but kind smile. For the first time in a long while, smiled back at a stranger. It was a small gesture, a fleeting human connection, but it calmed something inside her. When they stepped off near the veterinary clinic, an icy wind whipped her hair across her cheeks. The puppy trembled. She gently rubbed his ears and murmured, "Just a little bit longer." Moments later, she walked into the clinic, fluorescent lights flickering overhead, the smell of disinfectant strong in the air. A friendly receptionist directed her to a waiting area, a few plastic chairs arranged around a low table with outdated magazines. She sat down, trying not to fret, but her heart pounded each time the puppy whined or shifted in her lap. She felt the sharp sting of anxiety she recognized all too well. That terrible fear of losing something vulnerable before she even had the courage to hold on to it. Eventually, the vet, a soft-spoken woman with warm eyes, invited and the puppy into a small exam room. As set him down on the exam table, she whispered, "Please be okay." The vet's hands were gentle but thorough. She examined his ears, eyes, teeth, and listened to his tiny heartbeat, her brow occasionally furrowing with concern. "He's malnourished," the vet finally said. "A little dehydrated and definitely in need of a good bath, but he looks like he can recover with proper care." Let out a breath she didn't realize she'd been holding, relief flooding her veins. The vet continued, "He might have worms or fleas, so we'll treat him for that. Overall, I think he's going to be okay." "Thank you," breathed. Her voice wobbled, betraying more emotion than she intended. She felt the puppy's soft head nuzzle against her arm, and that was it. Her resolve crumbled. She knew in that instant she'd do whatever it took to keep this little life safe. There was no going back to the lonely routine she once accepted as normal. By the time she left the clinic, medication and instructions in hand, felt a subtle lightness. Yet trouble weighed on her mind. She was not exactly flush with money. Her current job at a small printing company covered her rent and utilities, barely. Adopting a dog was a responsibility that could pull her deeper into financial uncertainty. Even so, the thought of surrendering him to a shelter triggered a physical ache in her chest. Over the next few days, life shifted. Mornings began with the puppy's eager face hovering near hers, his small nose booping her cheek, a gentle reminder that he needed breakfast and attention. She watched him devour each meal, wagging his tail with a fervor that bordered on comedy. He became her silent companion at night, curled up on the couch beside her while she scrolled aimlessly through her phone or read a worn paperback, occasionally pressing his tiny body against her side. She found herself whispering things to him, her worries, her regrets, as though confiding in a being that couldn't judge, only comfort. In her quiet hours, she thought about how to name him. She tested out various names softly under her breath when he was asleep. Milo, Buddy, Charlie, Finn. Nothing quite felt right until she stumbled across a memory of her childhood. When she was small, her mother used to read her a fairy tale about a brave little dog who helped a lost princess find her way home. The dog's name was Ollie. Something about that memory radiated warmth and nostalgia. She tried it out, Ollie. The puppy gave a tiny quirk of his head, ears perked as if listening intently. Then he bounded toward her as though he recognized something magical in that single word. And so, Ollie it was. One afternoon, about 2 weeks into their new life together, took Ollie to a small park near her apartment. The leaves had mostly fallen, leaving skeletal branches overhead. Still, the crisp air smelled of earth and promise. Ollie trotted alongside her on a makeshift leash. She'd fashioned it from an old belt and some rope, sniffing everything in sight. She caught glimpses of families laughing, couples holding hands, joggers lost in their own rhythms. It had been so long since noticed people around her with anything but passing disinterest. Now, accompanied by a new companion, she found herself absorbing sights and sounds with keener awareness. As they circled a small pond, ripples shimmering across its surface, noticed Ollie's ears pricking up. He stared across the water at a woman feeding ducks. It was a serene moment, like a painting coming to life. Then, out of nowhere, Ollie let out a sudden whine and tugged at his leash. "Hey, calm down," whispered, stepping forward to keep him from running off. But Ollie's whimpering only intensified, as if something about that woman or the ducks or the moment was stirring a memory. The woman across the pond seemed oblivious, continuing to sprinkle seeds for the ducks, her back turned to them. His heart twitched. There was an unexplainable pang, almost a sense of foreboding. But she shrugged it off, attributing Ollie's reaction to curiosity or excitement. Maybe he just wanted to chase the ducks. Nevertheless, as they walked away, couldn't ignore the tense set of Ollie's little body. She knelt down, ran her fingers through his fur. He was trembling. "What's wrong?" she murmured, concern heavy in her voice. Ollie looked up at her, ears flattening. There was no way for him to answer, of course, but a strange heaviness settled over her anyway. She couldn't shake the feeling that something invisible and significant had just happened. Despite the odd moment, life returned to a new kind of normal. Continued to juggle her day job with caring for Ollie. She confided in him the details of her endless financial anxieties, her memories of heartbreak, and even her fleeting hopes for the future. Ollie would tilt his head and watch her with those big, soulful eyes, as though urging her to keep going. Yet it was as if the universe had decided had been too complacent for too long. Events began to unfold in quick succession, pulling her deeper into challenges she never anticipated. The first twist came on a Wednesday. Was at work, flipping through the day's orders for the printing company, business cards, flyers, banners, when she got a phone call that rattled her to the core. She didn't recognize the number at first. The voice on the other end belonged to a hospital nurse. Her father, whom she hadn't spoken to in months, was in critical condition. A car accident. They couldn't guarantee he would make it through the night. His relationship with her father was complicated, mired in a labyrinth of old resentments and misunderstandings, especially after her parents' bitter divorce. She had sworn she wouldn't let him or anyone else break her heart again. But hearing that he was barely clinging to life, suddenly that vow felt heartbreakingly irrelevant. Without even clearing it with her boss, she grabbed her coat and rushed out the door, tears blurring her vision. The entire cab ride to the hospital was a haze of dread. Her mind reeled with regrets, wishing she'd stayed in touch, that she'd tried harder to mend things or at least have one heartfelt conversation. She didn't even realize she was clinging to the small picture of Ollie in her phone's camera roll until she reached the hospital entrance. She stared at that picture, his bright eyes, the unwavering loyalty in his posture, and found the strength to push through the sliding doors into the harsh fluorescent lights of the emergency room. Her father was in surgery when she arrived, and she was told to wait. The nurse recognized the panic in his gaze and guided her to a cramped family waiting area where the coffee was stale and the smell of antiseptic burned her nostrils. Every passing minute felt like a small eternity. Memories washed over her, her father teaching her to ride a bike when she was little, the warmth of his laughter before everything went wrong. Then came the fights, the cold shoulders, the distance. She buried her face in her hands, uncertain whether she should pray or curse. It was hours before a doctor finally emerged. He looked exhausted, but there was a faint note of compassion in his eyes. "He's stabilized," the doctor said. "He lost a lot of blood and sustained internal injuries, but we think he'll make it, though the next 24 hours are critical." Relief crashed over with such force that she nearly collapsed. She was allowed a brief visit. Stepping into the room, she saw her father hooked up to wires, tubes, beeping monitors. His face was pale, bruised, and bandaged. Her heart pounded as she approached the bed. So many times she'd pictured what a reunion might look like, but never did she imagine this. She gingerly touched his hand, half expecting him to pull away. But he remained unconscious, his fingers limp beneath hers. A tear slipped down her cheek. She whispered, "I'm here, Dad." She wished she could tell him more, apologize for the silences, for her bitterness, but the moment for confessions had vanished. All she could do now was pray that he'd wake up and give them both a second chance. Still trembling, left the hospital in the late evening. She took a bus home, stared out the window at the city lights smeared by rain on the glass. Her shoulders felt impossibly heavy, yet a flicker of hope remained. She realized the first thing she wanted to do was hug Ollie. That puppy had worked his way deeper into her heart than she'd ever anticipated. When she opened her apartment door, Ollie bounded toward her, tail wagging furiously. The tension in her chest loosened just from the sight of him, a rush of warmth that nearly brought her to tears again. She set her bag down and scooped him into her arms. "Oh, Ollie," she breathed, letting the day's grief spill into his soft fur. And so began a harrowing stretch of days. Juggled shifts at work with almost daily hospital visits. Her boss, though obviously displeased with her frequent absences, seemed to sense the gravity of her situation and refrained from penalizing her too harshly. She watched her father slowly regain consciousness, then begin a long path to recovery. It was awkward at first, each unsure how to talk to the other, but in halting, cautious conversations, they confronted the heartbreaks and misunderstandings that had once divided them. Every night she returned home to Ollie. In the quiet of her apartment, she found a peaceful refuge from the weight of her father's fragile state and her own swirling emotions. Sometimes, she thought Ollie could sense her anguish. He'd rest his chin on her lap, peering up with a gentle concern in his eyes that words could never convey. Weeks passed. Gradually, the bruises on her father's face faded. He began eating solid food and regained enough strength to grumble about hospital food. At one point, he tried to lighten the mood by joking about how the bland Jell-O was an insult to civilized society. Found herself laughing, though tears glistened in her eyes. She hadn't realized how deeply she'd missed his humor, no matter how corny it was. And then, in a moment that would echo in her heart forever, her father gently took her hand. "Thank you," he said, voice rasping from disuse. She swallowed the lump in her throat, gently squeezed his fingers. No more needed to be said. In that small moment, they both sensed the possibility of rebuilding something precious, though fragile, in whatever time remained. But just as finally dared to feel a sliver of optimism, life her again. The printing company announced sudden downsizing. She was let go, her position deemed non-essential. The news hit her like a thunderbolt. She stood in her boss's office, the hum of the fluorescent lights and the ticking of a cheap clock punctuating the silence. She was handed a severance check that wouldn't last more than a month. The boss offered a mumbled apology, but it didn't alleviate the gut-wrenching dread clamping her chest. She walked out with her few belongings in a cardboard box, heart pounding and face burning with the sting of humiliation. She spent that afternoon wandering aimlessly, ignoring the drizzle that soaked her clothes and seeped into her shoes. Her mind churned with questions. How will I pay rent? What about Ollie's food, his vet bills? How can I handle this on top of Dad's condition? The burden felt impossibly large, and for a moment she feared she'd crumble under it. When she finally returned home, shivering and exhausted, Ollie was there at the door, pawing anxiously. She sank to her knees, pressing her face into his neck. "I lost my job," she whispered, voice choked with tears she'd held back all day. Ollie whimpered in response, licking the salty droplets from her cheek. In that vulnerable moment, felt less alone, realizing that if she lost everything, at least she had Ollie's unwavering loyalty. But loyalty doesn't pay the rent. That night, she spread out her meager bank statements and severance pay stubs on the small kitchen table, trying to figure out how to make ends meet. Even in her best calculations, she had maybe a month and a half before she'd start missing rent. She cursed herself for not saving more, for not preparing for emergencies like this. Each time she glanced at Ollie sleeping on the couch, her resolve hardened. She couldn't allow him to end up back on the streets, and she couldn't fail her father now that they were finally reconciling. She had to find a way forward. Driven by desperation, pounded the pavement for job interviews. She walked into restaurants, retail stores, offices, any place that might have a vacancy. Most of the time, she was met with polite rejections or promises to keep her on file. Days blurred into one another. Nights became restless, filled with nightmares of being evicted, of Ollie being taken away, of losing her father just as they were beginning to heal. Then, one rainy afternoon, she sat huddled in a coffee shop, scanning online job postings on her phone. She overheard a snippet of conversation from a table nearby, a man discussing an upcoming benefit event for local shelters. Something about the conversation drew her attention. She scooted closer, eavesdropping without shame. She couldn't help herself. A local event, possibly involving animals and charitable outreach, might be the spark she needed. She leaned forward, heart fluttering as she heard mention of volunteer opportunities. Even if it didn't lead to paid work, maybe it was a way to keep her morale up, and who knew where volunteering might lead. As soon as the man ended his call, mustered her courage, approached his table and introduced herself. Her cheeks burned with nerves, but she pressed on. She explained that she had rescued a puppy and felt drawn to help animals. She asked if he needed volunteers or staff for the upcoming event. The man, whose name was Justin, seemed taken aback by her sudden approach, but something in her earnestness must have touched him. He offered her a seat and told her about the benefit auction his nonprofit group was organizing to help strays in the city. They needed as many volunteers as they could get for planning, coordinating donations, and managing the event. Although it wasn't paid, felt a spark of hope. Sometimes, showing up in the right place at the right time could plant seeds for future opportunities. She started volunteering the next day. With surprising enthusiasm, she pitched in wherever she was needed, answering phones, folding flyers, calling potential donors. She wasn't sure how it would help her immediate crisis, but it felt good to do something positive in the face of her own turmoil. If nothing else, it reminded her of why she felt so connected to Ollie. Each stray animal was a life longing for help, for warmth, for a chance. Each phone call she made to drum up support was fueled by the memory of how she found Ollie on the streets. As the weeks crept closer to the event, noticed Justin watching her occasionally with a thoughtful expression. One day, he pulled her aside. "Listen," he said, in a gentle but direct tone, "you're not just a volunteer. You're good at organizing people, you're persistent, and you clearly have a real passion. We don't have a big budget, but we could use someone like you on our core team. It'd be a temporary contract, but at least we can pay you something." It wasn't a dream job with a high salary, but nearly burst into tears on the spot. She accepted immediately. That evening, she rushed home and celebrated with Ollie in her tiny kitchen, dancing around with him, tears of relief washing down her cheeks as she thought maybe, just maybe, things are starting to turn around. She called the hospital and gave her father the good news. He responded with a rough chuckle that quickly turned into a cough, but there was pride in his voice. As the day of the benefit arrived, the entire team was on edge, wanting everything to be perfect. Worked tirelessly from dawn, setting up tables and decorations at a local event hall, ensuring that each silent auction item was displayed attractively. Dressed in a simple but neat outfit, she dashed between tasks, adrenaline fueling her every step. When the doors finally opened and donors, local businesses, and other supporters began streaming in, she forced down her nerves and greeted them, guiding them to the registration desk, explaining how the auction would work. An hour into the event, stood at the edge of the room, surveying the scene. Soft music played, and the murmur of lively conversation floated through the air. Plates of appetizers were being passed around. She felt a twinge of pride. People seemed genuinely excited to bid on the items, many of which supported local shelters. She remembered how, not long ago, she felt so close to losing everything. Tonight, at least, she was part of something bigger than herself, something that could actually help animals like Ollie. And then, amidst the crowd, she spotted a familiar figure. The woman from the park who had been feeding ducks on that fateful day when Ollie had trembled in fear. Recognized the silhouette of her hair, the tilt of her head. She couldn't put her finger on why it gave her a shiver of apprehension. The woman was elegantly dressed, mingling with donors. Eyes followed her as she gravitated toward the silent auction tables. For a moment, their gazes locked from across the room. The woman's expression shifted, just a flicker of recognition, perhaps. Then, in an instant, she turned away, disappearing into the throng. Something unsettled, an echo of that day by the pond, the same uneasy feeling in her gut. But she was too busy to dwell on it. More guests were arriving. She had tasks to do. The evening wore on, culminating in a heartfelt speech by the organization's founder, a short awards ceremony for notable donors, and the final call for silent auction bids. By the end of the night, the group had raised a sizable amount. Hugs and laughter erupted among the staff, tears of relief and joy glistening under the venue's soft lights. Let out a breath she'd been holding for hours. They had done it. Tired yet exhilarated, she began to help clear the tables and pack things up. That's when a voice spoke behind her. "Excuse me, you're right." She turned to find the same woman from earlier, standing poised in a sleek black dress. Up close, her eyes were warm yet carried a strange intensity. "I saw you helping with the event," the woman continued. Forced a polite smile, though her stomach fluttered nervously. "That's right. Thank you for coming tonight. We really appreciate your support." The woman nodded, gaze drifting briefly. "It's wonderful what you're doing here. Actually, I need to tell you something about your dog." Instantly, defenses rose. "My dog, Ollie. How do you know about him?" A flicker of something shadowy crossed the woman's face. She gave a small sigh. "I saw you two in the park a while back. I don't know if you remember. He seemed to recognize me." So heartbeat hammered. The memory of Ollie's odd reaction by the pond resurfaced, mixing with her current alarm. "Who are you?" she asked, trying to keep her voice steady. "My name is, I used to work at an animal rescue. I volunteered with a group that helps strays get fostered. That's how I first met Ollie." His throat constricted. "Wait, you've met Ollie before, but he was a homeless puppy when I found him, alone on the street." The swirl of confusion and panic coiled in her chest. His posture remained calm, but her voice trembled slightly. "It's complicated. Ollie, well, we called him Griffin at the shelter, wasn't just a stray. He was originally part of a litter that disappeared." Her eyes flicked to the floor. "They were targeted by a man who wanted to sell them. It's a dark story. The rescue was trying to get them back when I ran into him and tried to help. But things went horribly wrong, and I never saw him again until that day in the park when he recognized me." His mind reeled. Could it be? Was Ollie once part of some illegal operation? That might explain his fearful behavior at the park. But the mention of a man wanting to sell puppies made her stomach churn. She swallowed hard. "Look," she said softly, I rescued him off the street. He was in terrible shape. If something happened before, I don't know what it was. I only know he's with me now." Reached out to rest a hand on his arm. It was a delicate gesture, filled with quiet urgency. "I'm not accusing you of anything. You saved him. I can see how much you love him. I'm telling you this because the man who took that litter, he's not someone who gives up easily. The rescue I worked with found out he's been trying to track down any of the pups he lost. There's no telling what he'll do if he finds Ollie. I don't want to alarm you, but I think you should be aware." A chill snaked through, the gravity of warning hitting her full force. She could sense the sincerity, the concern in the woman's words. But how would he find Ollie? Why would he even care about him now? Shook her head. "I only know rumors. Some say he's involved in dog-fighting rings. Others say he's breeding them for profit. If he thinks there's a chance one of the pups escaped and might be valuable, or that you might cause trouble by exposing him, who knows what he's capable of?" His mind filled with horrifying images. She couldn't fathom losing Ollie to some cruel fate. She closed her eyes, trying to steady her breathing. "You're sure about this?" "I am," replied. "I've seen his methods. He's cunning, manipulative. I left that rescue group partly because I was so afraid. When I saw you with your dog, I recognized him. And Ollie recognized me, I'm certain of it. He was always the sweetest pup, but we could see trauma in his eyes back then. Listen, I'm sorry to drop this on you tonight, especially after all your hard work. I just had to warn you." Nodded, her heart pounding. "Thank you, I'll be careful. Please, if you hear anything else, let me know." Pressed a slip of paper into his hand, her contact information. Then she slipped away into the thinning crowd, leaving standing amid the bustling cleanup, her mind a swirl of fear and questions. She clutched that paper, acutely aware of how precarious life felt. Everything she'd worked toward, rebuilding her relationship with her father, finding a new purpose with the nonprofit, caring for Ollie, now balanced on the edge of a threat she never saw coming. That night, as she returned home, felt hypervigilant, scanning the streets, paranoid someone might be following her. She double-checked the locks on her door and windows, pressing her back against the wooden surface once she was safely inside. Her breath trembled in her throat, and her hand hovered protectively over Ollie's soft fur. Could she handle another layer of fear in her life? When she finally managed to catch a few hours of troubled sleep, nightmares plagued her. Images of an unknown figure snatching Ollie away, of her father drifting further out of reach, of everything unraveling in a swirl of darkness. She woke up drenched in sweat, tears clinging to her lashes, her heart hammering so intensely it felt like it might burst. For the next week, she tried to pretend nothing had changed, but her anxiety was a constant hum beneath every moment. She devoured online tips about how to keep a dog safe, how to handle potential stalkers, how to protect oneself in threatening situations. She confided in Justin, without details, mentioning only that she had reason to believe someone from Ollie's past might be looking for him. He offered to connect her with a friend in legal aid if it came to that. Meanwhile, her father's condition improved steadily. Though he was still in the hospital, the doctors were preparing him for eventual discharge. During one visit, felt torn about sharing her worries with him. She didn't want to worsen his stress when he needed to focus on healing. But she couldn't hide the tension in her body, the dark circles under her eyes. He squeezed her hand gently, wincing slightly at the IV in his arm. "I might be old and beat up, but I'm not blind. Something's bothering you." Exhaled. "It's just complications. With work with Ollie, someone might be after him." Her father's eyebrows furrowed. "After a puppy, good heavens." "It's a long story," whispered, swallowing back tears. "But I'm dealing with it. I don't want to lose him." Her father's grip tightened. "I might not have been the best dad, I know that. But if you need help, don't hesitate. I owe you more than I can repay." Her eyes shimmered with gratitude and sorrow. She only nodded, forcing a smile. After that conversation, she felt a renewed determination not to give in to fear, but destiny had other plans. One evening, stepped out of her apartment building to walk Ollie before bedtime. The street was quiet, casting elongated shadows. She glanced around uneasily, every nerve on alert. Ollie sniffed at a patch of grass by the curb, oblivious. Then she noticed a sleek black car parked across the street. It had tinted windows, the engine idling softly. Something about it felt off, like it didn't belong on her sleepy block. Her heart rate spiked. Trying to appear casual, she tugged gently on Ollie's leash. "Come on, boy, let's go back," she said under her breath. Ollie obeyed, trotting beside her. Her mind raced. Is that him? Am I being paranoid? Halfway across the lobby, she heard the building door creak open behind her. She turned, expecting maybe one of her neighbors, but instead came face to face with a tall man in a dark jacket. His expression was hard, unreadable, and it froze her blood. She clutched Ollie's leash, eyes darting toward the elevator. Before she could react, the man spoke in a low, almost mocking tone. "That's a nice dog you've got there." Every fiber of her being screamed danger. She tried to keep her voice steady. "Thank you, he's mine." The man offered a tight-lipped smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Must be nice having a loyal pet. Where'd you get him?" Her stomach flipped. This was no random conversation. She could sense the predator behind his calm. "My friend," she lied quickly. "She gave him to me. Now if you'll excuse." He stepped closer, his gaze fixed intently on Ollie. "He looks familiar. My boss had a dog just like that stolen from him. Wouldn't want to be caught with stolen property." His lungs constricted. Her heart pounded so loudly she could barely hear over it. She forced herself to hold his stare, to stand her ground. "He wasn't stolen. I rescued him from the street. Now back off." A flicker of anger flashed in the man's eyes. "Watch your mouth. My boss is willing to pay for the dog's return. You might even get a finder's fee if you're interested. Or if you'd prefer a bigger problem on your hands, keep the mutt. See what happens." He tossed a small card toward her feet like a snake shedding its skin. Then he turned and strode out, the echoes of his footsteps vanishing into the night. Was left trembling. Ollie whined and pressed against her leg. She stood there, heart thrashing, for what felt like an eternity. Finally she scooped up the card, half expecting it to be blank. But it wasn't. There was a phone number and a name scribbled in scratchy handwriting. Beneath it, a single phrase: "We find what's ours." Panic clawed at her throat. She wanted to tear the card into pieces, throw it away. But some instinct told her to hold onto it as evidence, just in case. She sprinted upstairs, locked her door, and sank to the floor, hugging Ollie so tightly he squirmed in protest. Tears stained her cheeks. "This can't be happening. He's my dog." Her hands were shaking so badly she could barely dial her phone, but she managed to text, "He found us. A man approached me in my building. We need to talk." Minutes stretched into an agonizing wait before the phone buzzed with reply, "I'm coming over. Stay put, don't let anyone in." The hour that followed was torture. Paced her apartment, adrenaline surging through her body. She checked the locks repeatedly. She pulled the shades down, half expecting the man to reappear at any moment or for that black car to be idling outside, waiting. Finally, a soft knock sounded. She peered through the peephole and let out a shaky exhale, stood there, wrapped in a coat, eyes darting nervously. Opened the door just enough to let her inside. Wasted no time. "Are you okay? Where's Ollie?" Gestured to the couch where Ollie was curled up. He looked anxious, as if sensing the turmoil in the air. "He's fine for now." His eyes flicked around the apartment, as if expecting some hidden threat. "Tell me exactly what happened." Recounted the encounter, her words tumbling out in a trembling rush. How the man threatened her, the business card, the mention of a boss who wanted Ollie back. His face darkened with each sentence. "That has to be him. Lowell, he's infamous among rescue volunteers. There have been rumors for years that he runs an illegal dog-fighting ring, plus black market breeding. No one's managed to pin him, though. Veldsik, what do I do? He knows where I live." His jaw tightened. "This is serious. You should consider going to the police." I swallowed. "They'll ask for proof. I only have a card, and who knows if they'll take this seriously. He's probably got connections." The weight of hopelessness bore down on her. Was silent for a moment, then her eyes glowed with sudden resolve. "We'll get proof. We'll find a way to protect you and Ollie. But you need to be ready to fight this. He's not going to give up easily." Fight, the word reverberated in his mind. She'd spent so long running from her own emotions and pain. Now she was being forced to confront a very real external danger. As terrifying as it was, there was no alternative. This wasn't just about her. It was about Ollie's life, a small creature she'd promised to protect. She glanced at Ollie, remembering the day she found him trembling under a. No matter how frightened she was, she wouldn't let him slip back into darkness. Clenching her fists, she said quietly, "I'm not going to let him take my dog." Placed a hand on her shoulder. "We'll figure this out," she promised, though the fear in her eyes was unmistakable. "For now, stay vigilant. Don't go anywhere alone. Keep a record of any suspicious activity. Let me talk to a few contacts in rescue circles. Maybe someone has evidence or the means to bring down." Nodded, though anxiety still coursed through her. After left, the apartment felt emptier than before. She snuggled Ollie and murmured reassurances. But a weight of dread pressed into her with relentless force, as if an invisible clock had started ticking. In the days that followed, carefully documented any odd occurrences: unfamiliar cars parked near her building, random phone calls that cut off when she answered. She looked over her shoulder constantly. Sleep became a luxury she rarely experienced, and even when she managed to doze off, nightmares jolted her awake. She still tried to volunteer at the nonprofit, but she was jumpy and distracted, constantly peering out windows. Was doing her part too, reaching out to her old rescue colleagues, digging into any leads that might link to illegal activities. Day after day, she found nothing conclusive. He was a ghost, rumored to operate under multiple aliases with crooked associates. The frustration was palpable, and as more time passed, felt a creeping sense of doom. His henchman had threatened her once. What if he escalated? Then, one evening, the unthinkable happened. It started like any other night: was home, unwinding with Ollie by her side. She had begun feeling slightly more optimistic. There'd been no sign of the black car for a few days. Maybe he'd backed off. Maybe the threat had passed. That hope shattered around 1 a.m. when a thundering crash jolted her awake. Ollie sprang up, barking furiously. Her door had been kicked open with such force that the frame splintered. Everything happened too fast. Footsteps pounded in the hallway, a dark shape loomed, and a hoarse voice hissed, "Where's the dog?" His heart nearly exploded with terror. She grabbed Ollie, who was barking uncontrollably, and ducked behind the couch. Another crash echoed, furniture skidding. The man was inside. She could smell his sweat, sense the rage radiating off him. She clutched Ollie, feeling his frantic heartbeat against her arms. She had no weapon, nowhere to run. Her brain screamed to act. Shaking uncontrollably, she managed to dart to the bedroom, slamming the door shut behind her. She fumbled for her phone, nearly dropping it. She dialed 911 with trembling fingers. The barking outside grew closer. The man was trying to break down the bedroom door now. Ollie whimpered in terror. 911, what's your emergency? A calm voice crackled on the line. Someone's breaking into my apartment," gasped, pressing her weight against the door as if that could hold it. "He's trying to take my dog. Hurry." She heard a muffled voice from the other side, followed by a sickening crack as the doorframe began to give. Time seemed to blur. Her mind careened in panic. Then, in a terrifying instant, the door burst open. A large man with a wild expression towered there, a sneer twisting his mouth. He lunged at her, grabbing for Ollie. But adrenaline and desperation lit up his veins. She shrieked, twisting away, trying to shield Ollie with her body. Something heavy struck her shoulder, a white-hot flare of pain. She staggered, fear fueling her strength. She kicked out wildly, connecting with the man's shin. He snarled and stumbled back. This gave her a split second to dart for the bathroom. She was too slow. He caught her by the arm. His grip felt like a vice. Ollie yelped, snapping at the man's wrist. A curse rang out, then the man backhanded across the face. Stars exploded in her vision as she collapsed to the floor, ears ringing. She heard Ollie barking, saw him baring tiny teeth in a frantic attempt to protect her. "Stupid mutt," the intruder spat, advancing on Ollie with rage-filled eyes. Felt a wave of pure panic. No, no, no. She wouldn't let him hurt Ollie. Summoning strength from the depths of her soul, she rose unsteadily and hurled herself at the man, locking her arms around his neck. He roared, flailing backward, knocking into a lamp which shattered in a burst of sparks. Before he could throw her off, the sound of distant sirens pierced the chaos. Tires screeched outside. The man's head jerked up, eyes wild. He shoved away with brutal force, sending her crashing into a dresser. Pain seized her body, but through blurry vision, she saw him bolt out of the apartment, footsteps echoing down the stairs. The next few minutes were a blur, police officers storming in, guns drawn, paramedics arriving, chaos and flashing lights. Neighbors peered from doorways, eyes wide with shock. Sobbed uncontrollably, clutching Ollie, who trembled and nuzzled against her, licking her tears. The paramedics checked her vital signs, her bruised face. She tried to choke out an explanation. "He came for my dog, said we stole him. Oh God." A wave of relief washed over her when she realized Ollie was alive, seemingly unhurt, though petrified. She held him close as she was escorted to the ambulance, half listening as the police took statements, checked the shattered door, and began searching the building for clues. Her mind kept circling the same terrifying question: will he come back? At the hospital, she was treated for a concussion and multiple bruises. By some miracle, nothing was broken. Her father, hearing the news, was beside himself. But he was still too weak to leave his hospital bed. The phone call they shared was drenched in tears and frustration. "I'm sorry, Dad," she mumbled. "I never wanted you to worry like this." He tried to comfort her, but his voice cracked with helplessness. When arrived, eyes wide with concern, recounted the horrifying ordeal. His face grew pale, a knot of guilt twisting her features. "This is what I was afraid of. I'm so sorry." "You tried to warn me," whispered. She winced from the bruises on her face. Ollie lay curled in her lap, ears flat, as if not wanting to be separated from her for even a second. "The police are investigating, but who knows if they'll get him. I can't go back there. It's not safe anymore." Gently laid a hand on his arm. "Stay with me. I have a small house, but I'll make room. We'll work with the authorities. We'll contact rescue organizations, see if we can gather enough evidence to finally stop. You shouldn't be alone now." Tears welled in his eyes, tears of gratitude, exhaustion, and the lingering terror of what she just experienced. "Thank you," she whispered, voice choking. 2 days later, bruised but alive, was discharged. She left her shattered apartment behind, grabbing whatever essentials she could carry for herself and Ollie. The rest she'd sort out later. For now, his home provided a temporary sanctuary, an unremarkable but cozy single-story house with a modest backyard. Ollie sniffed tentatively at every corner, tail tucked, still recovering from the trauma. Over the following weeks, his entire focus narrowed to a single goal: protect Ollie at all costs. With his help, she filed police reports, gave statements, and met with a detective who seemed genuinely sympathetic, but cautioned that organized rings like this were notoriously difficult to pin down. "We'll do our best," he said, "but stay vigilant." It was both a promise and a warning. Meanwhile, introduced to a network of rescue volunteers who were just as determined to expose. They swapped stories of threatened fosters, of dogs that disappeared without a trace. Together, they compiled information, cross-referenced incidents, building a collective case that they hoped would prove unstoppable. The quiet living room of his house turned into an impromptu command center, papers covering the coffee table, laptops blinking with open files. The group's resolve was unwavering, fueled by their shared outrage. Despite the tension, there were unexpectedly uplifting moments. In the safety of his backyard, Ollie gradually regained his playful spirit, chasing stray leaves and pouncing on squeaky toys. Watching him, felt a sense of wonder, how such a small creature could exude so much courage and unconditional love, even after so much hardship. And there was something healing in that for her. Day by day, she realized the woman she'd been, lonely, bitter, closed off, was transforming into someone new. Someone who could trust and fight for what was right, even in the face of monumental fear. But just as it seemed they were gathering momentum, the situation took a devastating turn. One dark night, well past midnight, and were hunched over documents at the kitchen table when's phone buzzed. She answered, then froze. An urgent voice spilled out of the speaker, and from the fragments overheard it was clear something awful had happened at a local rescue center. A break-in. Dogs were taken. Survivors were injured. The manager recognized the men from prior threats. Face went ashen. After hanging up, she looked at with haunted eyes. It's him. He's lashing out because he knows we're closing in. He's going after places that help strays. We're running out of time. His blood ran cold. She looked down at Ollie, who was curled by her feet. A surge of protective rage flared in her chest. Enough. She stood, pressing her trembling hands against the table. We can't just wait for him to come for us. We need to strike first, legally. Isn't there a way to get an injunction, protective order, something? His eyes lit with determination. Yes, let me call a legal advocate I know. We'll see what can be done. In the weeks that followed, the rescue community. They petitioned the city, organized an awareness campaign, and worked with the police. Evidence piled up, testimonies, photos, suspicious transactions tied to aliases. The environment felt electric with both hope and dread, an undercurrent of fear that he might retaliate violently at any moment. Finally, they got their break. A witness came forward, someone once on the inside of the operation. With this crucial testimony combined with all the evidence and helped collect, the police gained the leverage they needed. A raid was planned. The night before the raid, barely slept. Her father had been released from the hospital, was recovering at a rehab facility, and she talked to him on the phone. His parting words echoed in her head. Be strong. I'm proud of you. She wept silently, hugging Ollie close, feeling his steady heartbeat against her side, drawing courage from his warmth. Then dawn broke with a bright, defiant blaze of sunlight. That morning was surreal. Phones buzzing, rescue workers and volunteers pacing anxiously, waiting for updates from the police. And stayed in the house, watching the clock, hearts pounding. Sometime around noon's phone rang, a detective's voice on the other end. The raid was complete, and several of his associates had been taken into custody. They found dogs injured, caged, traumatized, but alive. The entire operation had been exposed. A tremor of relief shattered composure. She collapsed to her knees, tears rushing down her face, unashamed sobs racking her body. Sank beside her, hugging her tight, and Ollie bounded around them as if sensing the joy. Though it would take time for the legal process to unfold, the biggest threat was over. There would be no more menacing knocks at the door, no more midnight break-ins. His empire of cruelty had been dismantled. In the days that followed, helped coordinate care for the rescued dogs. She visited them at a temporary shelter, her heart throbbing with empathy. Some cowered in corners, bearing physical and emotional scars. Others wagged their tails weakly, as if hopeful for a fresh start. Recognized in their eyes the same resilience she saw in Ollie. She wished they could all find good homes as he had. Eventually, once the dust settled, she returned to her old apartment, what was left of it. The door was boarded up from the break-in, the inside left in disarray. She collected whatever remained, feeling a mix of sadness and closure. It was time to move forward, to leave that space and the ghosts of the past behind. Insisted she stay with her until she found a new, safer apartment. As it turned out, the nonprofit she worked for offered assistance in relocating volunteers who'd suffered harassment, a policy spurred by her situation and others like it. Fate, in its strange and twisting way, continued to provide glimpses of kindness. His father was improving too, making strides in physical therapy. She visited him often, Ollie in tow when allowed. On one such day, they sat in a hospital courtyard. Her father gingerly leaned down to pet Ollie. "So this is the mutt who caused all this fuss, huh?" he teased, though his tone was gentle. Ollie tilted his head, sniffing at his hand, then offered a small lick. Laughed softly, wiping away a tear. He's part of the reason I learned to fight back, she said, voice trembling with gratitude. For him and for you and for myself. Her father smiled, a weary, affectionate smile that lit up the fading sunlight around them. I'm proud of you, kid. You always had it in you. Months melted into a new normal. The legal case against proceeded, voice shaking but unwavering, and other rescue volunteers did the same. Their collective testimony was powerful, bolstered by the rescued dogs as living evidence of the cruelty inflicted by his operation. And in a victory that felt like a miracle, the verdict came. Was found guilty on multiple charges: animal cruelty, illegal trafficking, assault. He faced a lengthy prison sentence. The aftermath brought a wave of relief and heartbreak. The dogs that survived needed homes and healing. Poured herself into that work with renewed passion, forging a career with the very organization she had once volunteered for. She discovered a calling she hadn't known she possessed, advocating for the helpless, shining a light into the dark corners of neglect. And Ollie, sweet, faithful Ollie, remained her constant companion. The bond they shared deepened with every challenge they overcame. On quiet evenings in their new apartment, a humble but bright space with plenty of sunlight, would curl up on the couch, Ollie nestled against her side, his gentle breathing a lullaby of security and love. Sometimes she thought back to the night she first saw him, that trembling little puppy beneath a flickering street lamp. He had chosen me, she would remind herself, and I chose him right back. Reflecting on all that had transpired, the reawakening of her courage, the reconciliation with her father, the forging of new friendships, and the crucial role she played in toppling a ruthless operation, she realized how one small act of compassion could alter the course of a life. Or, in her case, multiple lives. The darkest fears, the gravest dangers, had in the end illuminated her capacity to love and protect. On a crisp morning almost a year after that fateful encounter, and Ollie strolled through the very park where he once trembled at the sight of. Now he bounded freely, tail high, greeting every passing dog with curiosity and joy. Inhaled the cool air, watching golden sunlight dance across Ollie's fur. She felt a serenity that once seemed impossible. She'd confronted her past, defended her future, and discovered within herself a reservoir of strength that was nothing short of miraculous. As they rounded the pond, the water reflecting the sky like a shimmering mirror, Ollie paused to sniff at a patch of grass. Looked up at the horizon, her heart swelling with the awareness that life could change in an instant, that pain and fear were real, but so were love and possibility. A single thought crystallized. I never expected that a homeless puppy would follow me home and lead me all the way here. She closed her eyes, feeling the sun's gentle warmth on her face, letting gratitude wash over her. Gratitude for a small, shivering pup who refused to stay behind on a lonely city street. Gratitude for the strength she discovered when everything seemed lost. Gratitude for life's mysteries, its twists and turns, which sometimes deliver us exactly where we're meant to be. Then, with a soft laugh, she opened her eyes, whistled softly, and watched as Ollie bounded joyfully to her side, tail wagging in a rhythm that matched the heartbeat of hope itself.